Welcome back. I'm Tim Erlander with the Republican Roundtable, and with me once again is my co-host, Mark Sullivan.
Good
Mark,
to be
it's
back,
always
Tim.
good to see you.
Oh, yes.
And our special guest is Norann Dillon.
Good evening.
And Norann, it's very nice to have you. You're a past legislative candidate, and you're here to talk to us about light rail transit.
That's correct, and thank you both, gentlemen,
But
for
before
having me back. Yeah.
Before you start on that, give everybody a little bit of a background as to how you got into this.
Well, how I got into this was last fall in the legislative races in 2012. Twin West sent out flyers encouraging the recipient to contact their candidates and ask where they stood on light rail. And there was one in particular that just didn't really pass my sniff test, the common sense, talking about if we just had another $125 million that we could unlock, almost $1 billion from other sources, and that just didn't make much sense to me. So I looked into it a little bit. I was also helping a legislative candidate, and I knew that he would have to have some of that information to be able to talk to people as he went around campaigning. And the more that I've dug into this, the more that I have found that it is a very bad deal for taxpayers. It really is a bad use of limited public resources, especially when there is a better alternative out there in the form of bus rapid transit.
And we're here to talk about the proposed LRT from, is it Eden Prairie to downtown Minneapolis?
I think they call it the Southwest Corridor.
That's correct.
Southwest Corridor, right.
Right, the Southwest light rail line right now.
And we're also going to look a little bit at the route that goes from the Mega Mall downtown as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they call that.
The Hiawatha?
The Hiawatha
Yes.
line, okay.
The original light rail line.
Mm-hmm.
I have managed to avoid riding it up to this point.
Okay.
I know a few people who have. Some of them like it, some of them don't. Mm-hmm. What are the main difficulties with light rail transit? Let's start with cost.
Well, cost is the biggest difficulty of all. It is incredibly expensive as a fixed asset, being inflexible as it is. The way that funding is set up here in Minnesota for these lines is the cost is split 50-50, supposedly between the state and the federal government. But they don't make it sound like that the state has to pay the entire half of the share. In the case of the Southwest Light Rail Line, they're starting at a $1.25 billion. That's with a B, $1 billion cost. I don't really trust that. They are light rail, and these public works projects are notorious for cost overruns.
What did not Minnehaha, but the
Hiawatha? Yeah.
light rail started out at like about six.
It was 470 million, and
I thought
when
I was
all
thinking
was
600
said and
million.
done, it ended up at 715 million.
And that's not counting what others had to put into it. I know, like the utilities had to move lines downtown and everything else. I think the total cost actually probably for everyone wound up being a little closer to it, actually to $1 billion, I believe, didn't it?
Well, what I've been able to find is that it started at the 470 million. That was the initial estimate, and then the final cost, which you're right, they had some problems. They had to move utilities. I think there, maybe was a change with the station, and that's how they ended up at the $715 million number. But that's a cost overrun of 52%. And if you apply that to the Southwest Light Rail Line, then really we ought to be considering that this thing is going to end up costing taxpayers $1.9 billion.
Just say $2 billion and round it out.
If we want to round it out to $2 billion.
Give or take $100 million.
Once you get up that high, it doesn't really matter anyway.
Well, unfortunately, that seems to be the mindset.
That's
of it.
right.
So why I'm out and I want other people to hear a different side of the story and to hear all of the facts. Twin West now is also very recently they have issued the results of a new poll in which they say that almost 7 out of 10, about 70% of people say that they would like to have light rail and they would like to see the state invest in it. But all they tell people is that, would you like to see the state spend $125 million in order to receive $625 million from the federal government? Well, they don't talk to you about the other 30% of that pie that is still borne by taxpayers. And that other money comes from both sales taxes, which are incredibly regressive.
Yep.
And they are borne mostly by people of low incomes, and by property taxes. $125 million is going to have to come from Hennepin County taxpayers.
Now, is any of this federal funds?
Well, the federal funds is supposedly the $625 million. It's supposed half of it. But I mean, as we continue to hear news every single day coming out of Washington, D.C., we're talking about a group of people that aren't operating under a budget, can't seem to manage their money. You know, we're $16 trillion in debt.
Right.
I don't really know who believes they're going to have that money for us.
No.
That's what I wonder
Let's put it
myself.
this way, it's still coming out of someone's pocket, whether it comes from Washington or comes from Minnesota or the county or wherever it comes
Or our
from.
grandchildren.
You know, it's you, me, you know, it's
Right.
you and everyone out there is going to wind up paying for this thing.
Now, Norann,
not a freebie.
one thing we should make clear, we're just talking about the building expenses. That's supposed to be shared between the state and the federal government, but I take it after the thing is built and it starts running, assuming it ever gets that far, then we get to pick up the operating costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just the one thing, but before we leave, the capital costs that I would really like to mention is this thing about property taxes. I've done some research. I just continue to
Go
dig
ahead.
because what I have found is very troubling to me. You have this $125 million, which is the Hennepin County share of the capital cost, that is the cost to build the line in the first place. Well, already here, for those of us that live in Hennepin County, I live up in Plymouth, and our share of property taxes to this county that has been devoted or diverted to to the Hennepin County Rail Authority has tripled in the past 5 years. And that's only going to continue because we have one light rail line in existence with the Hiawatha line. You know, we have the Central Corridor coming online,
they're
and those
building
costs, they're going to continue. So the more lines they build mean higher property taxes for you and I. And the higher property taxes hurt people on fixed incomes. I know for sure, like, you know, I mentioned, I've been a legislative candidate and I've helped other ones. And as I door knock, seniors, most of all, are very afraid. How are they going to be able to afford their homes because the property taxes continue to go up? And so here we have people who are paying for a train they may never ride, and at the maybe possible outcome of losing their house. I mean, I really think that people need to know all of the facts about how this is going to be funded.
Now, another item that always has struck me, and that is that these things never pay for themselves once they start running.
That's correct. And it's not even exact. I have been following this issue as the bills have been introduced and information is presented over at the legislature. I've been following the transportation committees, the policy, and the finance committees. And recently the Met Council came in and talked about their transit system, and they were actually pretty boastful that they recover more through the fare box, more of those operating costs at the fare box than what other cities around the country do. And I think the average is 29 cents. So that means that if a transit ride cost $1, they only get back 29 cents. The rider pays that much of it. So that means the other 71 cents has to come from somewhere. And right now, it's split between, it's called CTIB, that is the County Transit Improvement Board, and that is the quarter-cent sales tax that only 5 counties of the metro are currently paying. So sales tax fund about a third of the cost of a transit trip, and then the state of Minnesota funds the other third of it.
So it's very heavily subsidized.
That's correct. But it's
Okay,
also
now
subsidized.
as compared to like just for example, as compared to a bus. A bus is subsidized about how much, do you know?
Well, you know, in 2011, we're still waiting on the 2012, or at least I haven't found the 2012 numbers yet. So based back in 2011, each light rail passenger was subsidized to the tune of $1.30. I think it was $1.36, and then a bus rider was subsidized at 59 cents.
Right,
I could have those
so-
numbers just a little bit backwards, but
Roughly about a third of the subsidy for buses for light rail.
Correct. Now, they also have, and there are federally mandated programs to conform with ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, that they have to provide practically door-to-door transit, and those are very, very high. You know, those are subsidies of upwards of about $20 a passenger, but again, that's an unfunded mandate by the federal government, and there's nothing that the state can do about it. And that's why that subsidy, you know, tends to be quite low as it is because it's spread across all all transit services that the Met Council offers. But since you asked the question about operating costs, you have people around the state of Minnesota, because they have to pick up about a third of that operating cost, who never will ride these trains. And they're paying for them through those operating subsidies. So the more rail lines that come online is the higher the cost. You often hear the advocates for the Southwest line and for other transit lines talk about how we're not keeping up with our peer cities. We're not keeping up with the Denvers or the Portlands or the Dallases. And as you look at the cost of these things, as you build them out, and as then you have to subsidize them, to me, I feel like, well, I hope we're not keeping up with them, because it's
Well, I
almost a
hope not,
rate.
because from what I understand, just about every city who has a light rail is losing their shirts on them.
That's correct.
And some have even shut them down and quit using them.
Well, I would be very interested to know which ones those are, because that's what I think that
I'm trying to remember
we're.
which one that they've started shutting down lines anyway. I
Right.
can't remember if it was like Dallas or Houston. I think it's one of them down in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong on that, but I know I have heard a couple of them are starting to, because they're going broke, so they're cutting back on.
Right. So if we already know that this is not cost effective, and we do, because it was required a cost benefit analysis before they built the Hiawatha line. MnDOT commissioned a study. The University of McAllister did it, and it's out there, it's available, and even they did all of the benefits. You know, not just that 29 cents that's recovered at the fare box, but the fewer auto accidents by taking cars off the road, improved air quality, savings of travel time. I mean, they took into account all of those quality of life intangibles, and even still they returned 42 cents on every dollar. So that means they knew before they built Hiawatha that it was going to lose money, and the same is going to be true of every other light rail line that they put in. So we are going to expand, and we are going to grow. I mean, you know, we're going to add residents, we're going to add jobs. I mean, there is a need. There's a need to address congestion. You know, trains are not the only answer, buses are not the only answer. We need to add new lanes. So we do need to be planning, but let's do it in the way that makes the most sense with limited transit resource dollars. And that's why, you know, I've come around and I found that bus rapid transit would be an excellent use for that very same corridor into which right now that they want to put a train. And so do you mind when you talk a little bit about
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you. And back in 2000, MnDOT did studies on a number of corridors. And again, I mean, this is just all stuff that I've been able to find by doing a little bit of research online. They looked at the Southwest Corridor line, and they found that it was ideal for a dedicated busway. And so it would look just like a train line, even that when the buses pass through an intersection at grade, there would be gates that come down so that the car...
So basically an express busway.
Exactly. There's one right now that exists between the two campuses of the U, and bicycles, I'm pretty sure, may use it, but it is only, cars may not. It is only for the buses that service the two campuses. And they could put that in the same corridor for about $170 million. I mean, you think about the order of difference, $170 million to build versus $1.25 billion, or $2 billion if we have the same cost overruns. So we're not signing taxpayers up to an enormous bill. You will still have to subsidize it, but you can also make it flexible. You can put more than one route on that corridor at a time. You can only have...
And if you have a slow period, you can take those buses and use them somewhere else.
That's true.
You're not literally limited to just where the tracks go.
Right, but you can have multiple lines running at the same time. You know, you can only have one train running on the track, but if you can have an express line, so you can be picked up in Eden Prairie and zip straight downtown Minneapolis without any stops at all. You could have a local that stopped, you know, occasionally, and then you can have just a regular service. The proposed Southwest line is going to have 17 stops over its 15-mile length. So there's going to be more than a stop a mile. How long do you think it's going to take to get from Eden Prairie down to Minneapolis?
It's going to take at least an hour.
Well, I don't know about an hour, but it's going to take as long as it would with a bus.
Right. Well, it's going to take longer, I would suggest. Right now, there's a Southwest Transit They're kind of the brown buses, you know, that service between Eden Prairie and downtown Minneapolis. Their express service, even at peak times of the morning and the afternoon, take about 30 to 35 minutes to get from downtown Minneapolis to Eden Prairie. And they have committed about $67 million in their long-range plan to build out park and rides and, you know, do some improvements in their system. So that means that you should infer from that that they are going to be competing with the Southwest Light Rail line. So we're going to have two subsidized services going and, you know, serving the same corridor and the same passengers. If the Southwest Light Rail line were instead of Southwest Busway, then the Southwest Transit would potentially be able to use it. And then we are using one route for all transit services for bus, and instead of having them compete with one another.
That would make a little bit more sense, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, it would. And so it kind of makes you wonder why we even got this far.
Let's look at who the villains might be. My first thought is there's probably some labor unions who are pushing for this. They could care less whether it helps or not. They're just looking for the jobs.
For the work.
Well, you know, what's really interesting is that it has not been the labor unions who have been pushing for it.
That's
Most of what
interesting.
you see in the press releases, the testimony going on before the committees in the House and the Senate are from business. It's the business communities, the chambers. They have been the biggest cheerleaders for the Southwest line and for for all transit, for a completely built-out transit system.
Any idea what the matter with them is?
No, I mean, they say that they want to be able to move employees. I'm not exactly sure when it became the public's responsibility to get people to work. I mean, I know that, you know, what I have a job, or if I volunteer, I have to find my own way to get there. So it's a little curious. It makes you kind of wonder about, you know, and a lot of people say to me, and it's not that I don't know this already, but follow the money. Where are the interests? Peter O'Toole is a nationally recognized commentator, researcher on transportation issues, and he calls light rail a hoax. He says light rail is a hoax on the taxpayer. It enriches engineering companies, construction companies, you know, probably unions in the bargain, you know, and then they in turn make campaign contributions to the people who vote for more light rail lines.
Well, I think what you also find is then you start having city planners and construction companies, et cetera. They start building high-density housing around your light rail line, and also start putting businesses in around your light rail, your hubs, your various stops, which of course would benefit from the light rail ridership moving through those individual stops. I mean, you know, they get off around the light rail. There's business as a service, they're right there. So you do have a benefit to your business community, to housing in a sense, but it's you know, that the people who build the housing, put in the business, these are the ones that will benefit from it.
Right, and you, if you can move people by train though, or you can move people by bus, why wouldn't you do it if it's going to be 1/10 of the cost?
Well, definitely, yes.
So that's why I say it's a much more beneficial use of taxpayer dollars. But that's another, I'm glad you brought up transit-oriented development, because that's what they call it. There's this assumption, this field of dreams assumption. If you build it, they will
They
come.
will come.
And that's what they're hoping for. But even
Yeah, what have we seen around the Okay, just a quick example. We have the Hiawatha line. What have we seen around the Hiawatha line?
right.
Has there been
There has
mass
been.
expansion
Well,
of
I
housing,
wouldn't call
mass
it
expansion
mass.
of business? I mean, you know, the big new populous area.
Well, they have had housing come in, and because I'm not a paid lobbyist, I am just, you know, an interested citizen,
Right.
and this doesn't make sense to me, and it's why I continue to look into it. I haven't had the time yet to look at all of the details of the development down there,
Understandable.
and how much of that is really private development, or how much of that is public incentives,
Public
tax.
funded.
Right, whether it's tax increment financing or any kind of other favorable treatment, that it may not be true private development coming up around the line. But the other thing that I have had a chance to notice, the University of Minnesota has the Center for Transportation Studies, and so they've been looking at the Hiawatha line. And what they have found is that they are realigning, the businesses in general are realigning low-wage jobs along the Hiawatha line. And to me, that just bothers me a little bit, because it kind of feels like the promise of the United States has always been economic mobility.
Right.
That you can come here and you can start on the ground floor, but you don't need to stay there, and you can
Right,
move up.
right, the ability to move up.
And so if we have a corridor that really is set up, to facilitate people to get back and forth to the low-wage jobs, I'm afraid that, we may be putting a dent into that American dream for many people who came here to pursue it. The other thing that you mentioned, other than the transit-oriented development, that really is dependent on population densities. And we do not have the population densities needed to support
Right.
a light rail line.
Yeah, the areas where there is any even minor success with light rail are generally those that have very, very high densities. All like on the eastern seaboard.
Right.
Some of your communities there that have been around since the beginning and have built up very dense, and and a lot of the streets are actually still very thin, unable to handle large amounts of traffic that have been built in communities that literally grow up around the subways, the light rail type systems.
One of the things I've learned over the years is that city planners, city managers, people who are interested in urban issues tend to want to have a metro area that looks like an old-fashioned European city.
Right. Well,
This is what they think the model should be, and this is what they think you should work for.
right, and it would work if light rail, if we had the densities to support light rail, then it would make sense. But we don't. I read.
And we don't want to be that dense because we just don't like to live on top of each other.
Well,
Right.
look what they managed to do with Minneapolis. The crime rates, the everything else. That's why people move out to the suburbs.
Right.
That's why they get away from the city.
Right.
People want to have a
But they
little
want
bit
to
of
move you
land.
back into high density where, like such as Minneapolis. I'm sorry.
They want to have a little bit of land. They want to have a yard. You can't have that with the densities that are required. Light rail needs to have densities of over 14,000 people per square mile in order to be justified, in order to be supported.
Where
Minneapolis.
did you get that figure?
That is from the Urban Land Institute. I read parts of a report on transit-oriented development and their own figure. So this is an organization that actually would be,
What
advocates.
is the average density in Minneapolis per square mile?
Now, based on the 2010 census, it is somewhere, and this is kind of an average for the area. It's not any one specific.
Yeah.
But for the average for the metropolitan areas is closer to 3,900 people per square mile. So it's about a third. And so we either need to build up 3 times as dense as what we already are, or we are doomed to fail with light rail.
That's right. Well, what they want is they want the people to live differently than what they do. They want them to conform to their model of what they think an urban area should be like, rather than pay attention to what people actually want, rather than what the government would like to see them do.
And
It's very different.
Representative Mike Beard, who has been served for many years on transportation committees, made that exact point in a committee hearing 2 weeks ago. He said, what is the role for transportation planning? Is it to tell people to get on a bike, to walk, to take this train? Or is it to say, where is it that you want to live? Where is it that you want to work? And then we find out a way to get them back and forth to the places they want to be.
Well, there's a whole tribe of government employees and urbanologists who just love to tell us how to live. They're just eager. They can hardly wait to take control of our lives.
Right.
And I guess we just have to do everything we can to make sure they don't get away with it.
Right.
There's a book that I read called Edge City some time ago, written by actually a Washington Post editor, which basically outlined that American development actually is moving outward. Edge City would be something like 494, where you have urban development, but far away from the central city. And apparently our urbanologists hate that. They want to pack everything in a downtown center,
Yeah. Well, I just finished.
whether we want it or not.
I just finished a book called Taking the High Road. It's a collection of essays on transportation planning. And one of the things that they just finished was about how the, now it's a few years old, and so most of the numbers were based on the 2000 census. But it made me curious enough to try to look and find answers for the 2010 census. And what it says is that transportation trends are moving people suburb to suburb. And so if you look at the maps of this
kind
transit,
of horizontal,
Yes.
not
Right.
spoke
Well,
into
right, the hub and
downtown.
spoke, and that's exactly the system that they have laid out right now, is to have all of these routes coming from suburban and exurban areas and into downtown Minneapolis.
Right.
But if that's not the way that people are
But
moving,
the traffic is moving
correct.
from
Differently,
suburb
yeah.
to suburb.
So there are many, many flaws with these fixed hard assets of light rail. Cost is the absolute, top of that list. But the bus rapid transit is a much more flexible option. It's a better use of taxpayer dollars, and that's one thing that they have never looked at is what else could we be spending this money on?
Well, what they want to do is spend the money. That's all they care about.
Well, I think they want this is all these other cities have light rail trains and they have light rail over there, and this really looks great way to live. So I want a toy too. And so
I'm sure that's
they're
part
gonna
of
do
it.
whatever they want to have their toy, their light rail, so it looks good.
Right. Well, that, and if I may, that is called modal bias, that people would rather ride a train than a bus. But Met Council spends money to encourage people to advocate for trains and for light rail. They spent $323,000 in grant money just in the fall of 2012 alone. Well, that money could be used to convince people to get on the bus.
Congestion. You mentioned congestion is one of the things they claim light rail is going to solve.
Sure.
Okay. Have they looked at all the congestion on Hiawatha recently that's caused by the light rail on Hiawatha and in that area? It has made traffic congestion 3-4 times worse on Hiawatha than what it ever was before the light rail came in.
Right, and that's one of the things that they've tried to use and can be used anywhere is traffic signal optimization, where they program the traffic signals to coordinate with the train so the traffic may flow better. But that's a good solution for congestion just about anywhere.
What this sounds like to me is big government for its own sake.
Well-
That seems to be at bottom, that's what it's all about. And light rail is just another variety of how people like to spend our money. It's our money, not somebody else's.
Well, I think what people don't understand is that they are, in the end of it, they're going to end up paying for a train they may
Right.
never ride.
Exactly. And I don't feel like paying for it, and I like the way you're fighting for it, Norann.
Yeah, well, thank you again very much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some facts, like I said, and let people know that there's more to this story.
We'd love to have you here.
And this is just one example of how big government likes to waste our money. And we could come up with others,
and they
but
do it
however,
so
it
well.
really is helpful to go into a dissection of what the particular problem is all about.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a good alternative out there for the limited tax resources that we have, and people really should be asking their elected officials about bus rapid transit in the Southwest Corridor.
Well, the problem is, of course, a lot of people don't know what to ask.
Is there any place?
And I think we're going to have to
Okay,
call it
we're out of
quits
time
now,
for that.
folks. We're at the end, and this has been a very informative discussion. Norann, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Glad to have you here.